Right, hello everyone. It's Shane here. Welcome back. It's Saturday, 27th of August when I'm recording this, and we've just had a week off of consolidation week. I hope you've had a good time. Hope you've rested and relaxed and taken some time away from this and feeling a bit refreshed, hopefully, and ready to get back into it. I've actually missed being engaged with you guys online. That's the honest truth. So there's something about these groups which are really great. There's a really lovely community that we've built, that you've built together, and I'm really enjoying that. So I thought I'd do a quick video just to say hello and touch base with you and give you some feedback on some of your Project 2 documentation, specifically the design process documents. Talk a little bit about Project 3 submission requirements and talk a little bit about Project 4, the poster. It's getting confusing, isn't it? There's so much to do. Anyway, here we go. Let's get into it. So the first thing you should see when you go to My Grades is something like this. You've got these submission buttons up here, something that's already been graded, upcoming, already submitted. If you look here it says View Rubric, so I think that'll give you access to the rubric, and then you may also have to click in the top left hand corner. It might say something like View Rubric there or something, but when you get in there you should see something like this, which is the view that I have. Now this is Farah Nazir's, very nice submission, and Farah, I've blocked out the information here, so don't worry. But when you open it up, you should see the overall mark out of 100. If you click on this link here, or this chevron, it'll open up and you'll see the 4 different sections, or however many there are in the rubric. You can turn on Show Descriptions, which gives you the text content of each description. So if you want to read a bit more about what that relates to, and you can also show feedback. The presentation section refers to the design process documentation as well as the presentation of your final outcome. So it's a mixture of both. If I don't have any comments in here, it's generally a good thing. Now I want to look at some examples of design process documentation. I want to show you a few of these, and they're all very good examples. If I'm pointing out some errors with them or some aspects of them that could be improved, it's certainly not a bad thing. This is Crystal Oliver's to begin with. I believe that's Crystal's. Yeah, lovely presentation. You can just see here, this page on the right is of course the front cover, and this is page 4 on the left. And this is her page 2 and 3. Now the only comment I gave Crystal about this is that the spine here, if you imagine this page folded, then the gutter space, the space between these two little images here, this little gutter, is going to be somewhat compressed when this thing, if this thing was actually printed out. Now it's designed as a booklet, it's designed to be printed out. Even though we're viewing it digitally, it's designed as a folded document. And whenever we fold something, there's a certain visual space that's compressed, and therefore the margin, if it's set at, let's say, 2 centimetres, it will look closer to 1 centimetre or less, depending on the binding. So be aware of that when you're laying out a document, to have a really decent margin in the middle, and to certainly never run elements across that. But that's the only issue. This is such a beautifully managed design process document. Initially, just fitting the image into the template, the correct ratio, etc. But the lovely kind of connection here, see this split color graphic is lining up really nicely with this aspect of the final outcome on the front page. And this photo here on the back of Nicholas Barker, just a lovely aspect, creating something interesting in the document. And if you look into the detail here, there's some really beautiful control of the typographic styling. There's a really nice sense of attention to detail. For the most part, all these gaps or these spaces between images are consistent. There's a slight difference there, barely noticeable. Use of caption point sized or caption styling here. Everything's lined up nicely. There's a little drop shadow on here. This little mauve or pinkish coloured box is sitting nicely there and allowing these images to really pop forward. These section titles are working well as subheadings. So look, overall, it's a really lovely example. Also too, just notice this very clean, well-lit photograph that Crystal's taken of her desk setup and just how much that adds. And also the scale, look at the scale of this image here in relation to the scale of these other images. She's got a dramatic change of scale in that spread, and that's really helping draw us in to the spread. And the lovely use of colour, very subtle, but it's very well controlled. Let's go to the next one now. This is Anna Molnar's. Anna's also done a really lovely job. The comment I believe I gave to Anna was just to look at maybe mixing up the composition a little bit more, having a little bit more white space, if possible. But, you know, there's nothing wrong with what she's done. It's very well controlled. It's very clear. The typographic styling has all been followed really nicely. There's clear distinction between paragraphs. Everything's working quite well. So again, another really nice job. Okay, so the next one, this is really, really nice as well. This is Cassandra's. And what's really successful about this is the attention that Cass has given to the problem of showing these little mock-ups. Because her final outcome had white background in a number of them, she had the problem of the frame not being visible. So she could have put a little key line like she did here on the front, a little stroke along the picture frame edge. What she's done is she set a very soft hue which matches her front, her final outcome key colour. She looks like she's given us sort of a 10% version of that, and use that as a little frame. And that in combination with its use down the bottom here, hopefully you can see that as well, just really subtle and really well managed, and it just allows us to be drawn into that section of the body text. And I think it's just really nicely done, very tasteful, very elegant. And here she's repeated that again, that little body text graphic box behind. And what that does too is it tells us straight away, once we've seen it once, we see it a second time, we know that's body text. And that separates the captions from the body text. It also separates perhaps some of these little notes, which sometimes can be confusing. So we've got captions here, body text here. That works really well. This is Kellyanne's, another very nice job. One thing to point out, the only thing Kellyanne, I think, missed was showing her frame edge. One thing, a design principle that's really important is framing. Actually distinguishing the edges of the thing that we're composing. If you don't show the frame edge, we don't really know, we're not really aware of the tension that you're creating with the arrangement of your elements within it. So think of a work of art, you know, we know where the edges are, there's a frame on it. Think of a photograph, we know where the edges are. So when you're designing something, if you've got a white background, and you're placing it on a white ground, you need to sort out some way of framing that. That's a very small issue. Everything else is really beautifully handled. Again, very clean. Notice her sketches have all been processed through Photoshop. She's got a lovely clean white background. She's numbered them. Look, this little bit of white space up here around this heading is working really well, and the heading's working really well. If you imagine that heading not being there, what would this page be about? How would you know what the hell this was about? Well, looking at it, we can see it's inspiration and ideation for something, someone's ideas about something. So headings and subheadings are really important to help give context for a layout. So again, a fair bit of information on the back, but it's clean, it's well handled. And this graphic grey box here is really helping sort of ground the page. There's a lot going on the page, but that box is really helping give us a sense of what to look at first. It's separating it from these mock-ups and from this text and this darker mock-up. And that's a really clever use of graphic elements. Michelle, a really lovely job, great final outcome, and a really strong design process document. It's so well handled, very professional standard. Some lovely graphic effects, this diagonal device here, which seems to work quite well. It's probably not necessary, but it's working. And her type is really well handled. There's not a lot of text, and what she's done is nice. She's put her body text here as reversed over this photograph, and it's working really well. But notice the grid again, everything's lining up nicely. Oh, actually, no, that's not. Nearly everything's lining up nicely. But it's really neat, really clear. Her little subheadings that she's made up, setting in that second colour, are looking terrific. So she's really understanding figure-ground relationships, clarity of information, hierarchy, having this big high-value photograph here and the dark brown kind of backdrop. That's like a key focal point now. It's bringing us in. It's creating a contrast, and we like contrast. We're pleased with contrast, and it helps us to see one thing above another, before another. So fantastic work. This is Lyndon Phillips, and another really nice, strong, clean, well-managed, well-structured design process document. Very, very solid. I think I pointed out something like, perhaps there could have been a little bit more of color treatment behind this bit of text, maybe just to make it pop a bit. Having said that, though, I quite like the white space. And I think I also might have said maybe compromise one of these or two of these 8 little thumbnail-sized mock-ups and have one larger one. So a bit like what Michelle did back here, there could have been a key image which provided a bit more of a focal point, drawing us into the composition. But really well handled. One point I didn't make, Lyndon, is, I'll bring it up here. Notice the extra line space for the paragraphs. Now, what that's doing, it's working okay here and there, but it's a little bit of an issue elsewhere. For example, here, notice the tension or the proximity between this part of the image of New York Times and this part of the paragraph. Now, that's almost closer than these two paragraphs themselves visually. So what that's doing is it's setting up a relationship here of these two elements, and it's almost saying these two are connected and these two paragraphs are less connected, which is not the case. Really, these paragraphs should form a single unity. They should have unity, and they should be separate from these other image elements. So just watch those negative spaces, because sometimes if you've got a negative space within a paragraph that's greater than the space around it, you might have some issues. It's not so bad on this page because these text elements are not as close, but it's a little bit iffy here. But this is the sort of level of refinement and precision that type requires, and it does take time. I mentioned to a few of you in the comments that it's unfortunate, but you just can't rush this stuff. Grids are helpful and paragraph styles are helpful because it helps us work a bit quicker, but the finessing and the refinement of these things, it really does take time, and you just have to allow yourself that if you want to do it really well. So that's it really on that section. I think that's enough. I probably talked for too long. So let's move on. Okay, we're going to have a look now at body and soul. submission requirements. There's been, or there probably will be a little bit of confusion around this submission aspect. So I just want to clarify. There is no template for the final outcome. You have to create your own. So I'll show you some examples of that. You also must create another design process document, another 4-page design process document. So there'll be 2 PDFs that you'll be submitting. Okay, so the first thing is submitting, and let me just highlight here this sentence under typographic limitations says the typesetting specifications for the document are to be provided in full on your type specimen printout. And if you go down here, format for submission, you can see it says submit 3, A3 project 3 body and soul. One sheet has got an original example, in other words a scan of your publication source. Second one is your reconstructed page. And the third one is a type specimen sheet or page of specimen settings. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. I want you to have your original copy scanned and placed on there, and then your duplicate copy. And it'd be good if you could set them up in such a way that flicking from one page to the other in your PDF allows me to really see exactly what's going on. And so what you do here is you take all the typographic styling from the sheet, from your source that you've ended up using, and you set them here in the style that they've been used. So if we have a look at the heading or the header of the magazine there, or the page title, they've called it page title. It's geared slab bold, 16 point on 19.2. It's center aligned, it's lowercase, and it's white on a black background. So they've set this in geared slab bold, 16 point on 19.2 leading, center aligned, lowercase, and they popped it in a black square. Here, the page subtitle, which is this little bit under here, news at themusic.com, is geared slab thin, 10 on 12 point, center aligned, lowercase black. The third one is the title of the page, or these titles of each section of the article. They've called it title. It's geared slab typeface, bold, 18 point on 14 point leading, left aligned, with a 4mm space before the paragraphs. It's in all caps and it's set in black. Right here, the pull quote, for example, pull quote number 1 is geared slab bold, 23 on 19. Pull quote number 2 is geared slab thin, 15 on 12, set in red. So you get the idea. Everything that's in your type specimen, everything that's on your reconstruction should be set here as an individual character or paragraph style, and you title it, name it, pull quote, etc. Another example, here's the original, beautiful clean scan. They've popped the word original on the page, which is useful, just because when you start looking at these at first glance, it can be take a few seconds to figure out what's the original, what's the reconstruction. So there's the reconstruction, original, and type specimen. And in this case, they've done the same thing. Title, maybe title 1, title 2, subheading, body copy, etc. Okay, so now we're going to have a look at project 4, which is the final big project for this class. It's a real doozy. It's really big. It's very challenging. I've got a few posters here. My daughter helped me show them a few minutes ago. So we've got an example here from Gaudi, 1900s to 1910. Lovely colours, simple graphic, good use of a grid. These posters are a big task. So I'm going to just quickly now show you through or step you through the brief. And just want to point out too that all or virtually everything you need for each assessment task should be located under an appropriate heading under the Assessments tab. So if you scroll down here to each individual brief, 20th century type, and if you go to the top link here, that's the brief, and you also scroll down, you've got all the assessment criteria as well. So you're welcome to, and you should be, reading all that, because then you know what I'm looking for. So let's just look at the summary. You'll be allocated a specific decade of the 20th century to focus your investigation on. The information sheet must contain multiple related segments. So we're calling these information sheets because they're beyond a poster. It's not just a simple poster, it's a complex information sheet. And you've got to keep the function in mind when you design something like this. So to choose one aspect of the subject matter to make a feature. So there's 3 different aspects. You choose one to make a feature. The content and copy, or the content of the text, is to be sourced and synthesized from reliable sources. Where or if used verbatim, the source is to be credited on your information panel. Use the State Library of Victoria identity supplied our pretend client in an exhibition venue. So the information panel must contain these 3 aspects. 1, the design of a typeface family from that period. And 2, the development of typesetting or typographic technology from that period. And 3, one of the following. Either a profile of a type designer, a design group or design studio, or movement, whose work in typographic-based design is well known, active or associated with that period. And C, significant influential typographic design work from that period. So it's either a designer, design studio, or design movement, or a significant piece of design from that period. So that's it. You've got to carefully consider the relationship between these components. So you might want to make it synthesized in some way, or there might be a thread throughout. For example, if you're doing a particular type face, you might wish to focus on the type designer, or you might focus on a particular usage of the typeface itself. It's really up to you. The point is, though, to really find something that interests you, I think. You've been allocated a decade. As I said to you in the notes, if you're not happy with that decade, you're very welcome to change, but I want you to do so by Wednesday of this week, so that there's not too much time wasted in that regard. I want you to be interested, though, in your decade. I want you to be keen, and I want you to do your research and find something really good to focus on. There's heaps of resource material available on Blackboard, and there'll be more coming up over the next few weeks. But make a really good start on this. So we've got a suggested process too in here about how to work, and I think that's a really good thing to follow. You will be required to print this and mail it to me, so I'll be sending you out my mailing address at some point for you to do so, and you have to plan for that in terms of the deadline. So there's also a couple of progressive submission points in weeks 9 and 11. But the final submission is Monday of exam week. The project is to be submitted in both of 2 ways. The first way is via post to me as a full-sized colour print. And you probably have to, you will. Don't fold it, roll it up and put it into a canister, because it'll be unfortunate to have the poster all creased. So roll it up, pop it in a canister, and then via Blackboard as a PDF. We'll talk more about that as we move along. So let's have a look at some examples. These are examples from past students of mine. A couple are not my past students. This is a really lovely one from the 30s, focusing on the type designer and the typeface Accidens Grotesque and the monotype system. Now remember, the brief's asking you for a typographic technology. So you have to really look into that. What is typographic technology? Typesetting or typographic technology from that period. It doesn't necessarily have to have been only from that period, but it should be used actively in the period in your decade. So a really lovely piece there. That was Dalton Bruns. This is not one of my students, but I think it's a really nice, clean, simple, well-structured, very respectful of its function, which is it's an information sheet. You know straight away what the decade is, you know who it's about. It's almost newspaper clear in that sense. It's not groundbreaking in any sense, but you don't have to break new ground. You just have to manage type well and make something that's readable and that's appropriate to your decade, and make it interesting. And this is interesting. Like, I want to read that. There's enough hierarchy and diversity and colour and visual information that I'm drawn into this. This is a really lovely composition. I love the space. I'm a really big fan of Paul Rand, and I'm immediately attracted to this. But again, very simple. What they've actually done here, they've focused on Paul Rand, but they've given equal attention to the three aspects, the content. There's not really been one favoured over the other in terms of the body text. But this simple graphic, the P and the R, it's a really lovely, simple approach. It wasn't one of my students, but I really like it. This was one of my students from a couple of years ago. So, you might want to consider making an original image. It could be a collage. It could be an illustrative component. It could be something you do to a photograph. Here, this student, whose name escapes me right now, wanted to kind of, mimic some of the stylistic work that Edward Feller was doing at the time, 1990s. And I think it made a really striking device to sort of draw us in. And the principle of deconstructing the work and the type was a really lovely aspect to and a theme that this student found. So again, that's this idea of finding some way of synthesising the three different aspects of the brief. Riley Griffiths was a really great student of mine a couple of years ago, and this is another nice piece from him. Really bold and, again, very attractive, very well managed hierarchy. I mean, just look at the fantastic contrast here, the body text scale compared to the scale of the letter forms of the decade 90, and just the use of the the halftone tint screen with the old style 1980s or 90s computer. For me, that's a really nostalgic image to see a halftone screen like that. So it really appealed well to the audience. He's thought a lot about the audience here, which you all should do. This is, again, it's a little bit spare, it's a little bit sparse, but it's also very appropriate. The student used an image from the era and he blew it up, or she blew it up, wasn't one of my students actually. And I've sort of got a love-hate relationship with that aspect of it, and with the fact I should say that this image behind is just so kind of blurry, and there's some issues with the way they've broken up paragraphs, but the first impression is really quite a dynamic and interesting composition and very appropriate to that decade. Next, this is a really challenging one because the Neville Brody's work was visually chaotic often, and the work in the 80s with the blooming, I suppose, of desktop publishing, people getting their hands on these machines and making images and type do a lot of things that images and type had never done before, and we went a little bit crazy, to be honest. And so a lot of the work from the 80s is distinctive and a little bit hard to look at, and a lot of readability suffered at the time because we were just so blown away with the technology. But I think what's great about this one is, although it is chaotic and it is reminiscent of that era, it doesn't suffer really from readability. You can read just about everything and it's not that difficult to get into. Whereas often work by Brody of that era was actually quite challenging to get into. He might not like me saying that, but not only Brody, but Carson, David Carson's work he actually did a lot of playing with legibility intentionally, which was really revolutionary at the time and has influenced a lot of designers since. And he was approaching publication design from a sort of an artistic approach, really. He was using image and text more as texture than as pure communication. text being able to be read has a pure content communication, but he was doing things with it that allowed you not to read it in some cases, and that was unusual. I'm not a huge fan of Carson's work, but I think he's key in shaping the design of the 20th century. There's another one here, Mr. Fruitiger, lovely sort of, I don't know, just reminds me of my grandma or something like that. He's just such a sweet old man, and a fantastic craftsman, designer of Avenir and half a dozen other beautiful typefaces. Very active typographic designer. Really lovely piece. Nice use of the RGB, CMYK kind of references here with, sorry, I should say CMYK, not RGB. And just tying it in nicely to the typographic technology of the era. Really lovely too, the earthy red that this student used, and that kind of ochre yellow, very sympathetic to the decade. This kind of tilted grid, which was invented really by the Bauhaus school, so very appropriate to use it here, and just a lovely piece. This is another one of my students, really well controlled again, very clean, just strong graphic elements that all tie in well, draw my attention in, fit the purposes of the brief, and this lovely treatment typographically of the decade. It's very strong. This was not one of mine, but it's not a bad little piece, I think. Again, really well controlled. Nice hierarchy between the three different aspects of the brief. And, don't be afraid to put images on here. As long as you, credit them, acknowledge the sources, you can use other people's images for this poster. Information sheet. Information sheets need to engage our attention. So images are a good way of doing that. This is pretty good too. It's hit and miss for me, but overall it's a very striking and appealing. A lot of white space, clean, bold form, and appropriate to the decade. So I think it's really quite effective. Good control of the nuances of the typographic styling. So overall, I think really quite successful. This one's again a good example, I think, of where you've got a decade that has a particular visual aesthetic that is often not very attractive. And there was a lot of stuff going on in the 70s that was really like bright purples and bright oranges and really garish kind of colour combinations. And this student did, I think, a good job to reference that without it being kind of all-consuming and ugly. And that's not easy to do. So if you have a decade that's challenging aesthetically, be careful you don't necessarily just, copy it. Let me just show you an example. Where are you? I suppose this is an example here. It's the David Carson work again. Sorry about the shiny paper there. But it's just so kind of chaotic. It's very hard to get into it compositionally. It's very hard to find a starting point. And then if you look at the details, although the student was attempting to repeat some of what Carson was doing at the time, it doesn't translate very well. So you just got to be a little bit mindful of that, I think, when you're looking at your decade. Don't necessarily just try to repeat exactly what the decade was doing. You've got an information sheet about the decade, so it doesn't have to be just a replica of it. It can just point to the decade in some way. This is one of my favourites, Neville Brody as the key designer. Garamond typeface and a HP printer, I believe. That's right, yeah, the HP printer. Yeah, the laser printer, yeah. So, but striking composition and really attractive overall poster, really draws me in. I love all the positive and negative spatial relationships and the contrast in scale that's going on here, the contrast in colour and dynamic angles. It's really appealing to me. It's the sort of poster I would have liked to have designed. This is pretty good too. It's a little bit messy maybe, but a really good effort, really nicely controlled overall. Just perhaps a little, you have to sort of tilt your head a few too many times to kind of take it in. And that's it. Oh no, there's one more. This is not one of my students, but I like it because of the image. The student has kind of created this themselves, I believe. It's a bit of a collage. And again, really appropriate for that era from the 40s. Oh, there's some more. Yeah, this was one of mine, I believe. Yes, really well controlled, really lovely. Again, all these little images really keeping our attention on the page. This little infographic about the typeface itself. And yeah, just really nice, compositionally, really well controlled. Oh, this is nice too. I love this. Again, another really lovely original image that's been created by the student here. Pretty simple structurally, but just really appealing. And it's a kind of a replication of the phototype setting disc that was around in the 50s. So look, that's it there in regards to the poster. There's a lot to it. I just hope you get started this week. There's a huge amount of work to do, and we want you to get really right into it. And I know that you guys will, because you both my classes are fantastic hard workers, and some of you are so busy you don't have time to work hard, and I hope you can find more time for this project, because it really will demand a lot of you, but it will really give you an opportunity to show your stuff, what you've been learning. So that's it really. I look forward to engaging with you again on Blackboard during the week, and there's a whole lot of threads up there now. I know you've had some time off, but if you go back to week 7, you'll see, oh, by the way, I just want to make sure you all watch the Helvetica movie, the video itself. Oh, it's not showing up. What's going on there? Studio, there we go. The Helvetica movie is a fantastic movie, really important for you all to watch. It's a really great insight into the industry of type design and the power of that single typeface and what it's done. Really highly recommended. So again, there's a lot of material. Please do all the background reading. This is where you'll find your knowledge deepening, and your ability to approach this task will be increased if you do all these other background tasks. All right, look, I've spoken for far too long. I'm sorry it's been such an extended video, but without someone leaning over my shoulder saying cut, I just get carried away. So all the best to you, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.